The steady rhythm of boxes being unpacked filled the Turner family's new home. A modest, two-story house nestled on a quiet street lined with towering trees and neatly trimmed lawns. For most families, moving was just an adjustment. But for the Browns, it was a triumph, a hard-won chance for something better. They had sacrificed so much to give their son, Aiden, this opportunity. They saw it as a fresh start, a gateway to his potential, and, as they liked to remind him, a future wide open with possibility. Standing in the doorway of his new bedroom, Aiden took a long, deep breath, clutching his backpack like a lifeline. The weight of his parents' dreams hung heavy on his shoulders, mixed with a bubbling cauldron of nerves and excitement. At 13, the world could seem impossibly vast and unpredictable. But today, his world narrowed down to one school, one chance, one day that could shape everything that came after. Aiden, look at this school, his mom said, her eyes bright with pride as she held up the pamphlet for Maplewood Academy. It's everything we could have hoped for and more. Remember, son, his dad chimed in, resting a reassuring hand on his shoulder. This place will open doors for you. You've got this. Show them what you're made of. Aiden nodded, mustering a small, determined smile. He didn't want to disappoint them. Not after all they had done to get here. The academy was known for its academic excellence and high standards. An elite school with prestigious alumni, sprawling fields, and a strict dress code. To his parents, it was a beacon of opportunity. But to Aiden, Maplewood felt like a storm cloud looming over his head, waiting to test him, and yet, he wanted to believe this move would change everything for the better. The next morning dawned crisp and cool. Aiden put on his carefully chosen outfit, a pressed button-down shirt and clean jeans. The best he owned, each detail meticulously prepared. His mom had helped him iron the shirt, wanting him to make the perfect first impression. As he looked in the mirror, he adjusted his collar and took a deep breath. This is it, he whispered to himself, trying to summon his courage. As his parents dropped him off at Maplewood's towering iron gates, Aiden could feel his heart pounding in his chest. The imposing red brick buildings and wide green lawns seemed almost regal. And as he stepped onto the campus, he felt small, as if he were standing before a castle he wasn't sure he belonged in. The courtyard buzzed with students laughing, chatting, forming tight-knit circles with the ease of long-formed friendships. Aiden felt their eyes slide over him, lingering a moment too long, their whispers trailing behind him like ghosts. He swallowed, brushing it off. It's all in your head, he told himself. You're the new kid, of course. They're curious. But as the hours went on, the stares didn't stop, and the whispers only grew louder. By lunchtime, he found himself sitting alone at the far edge of the cafeteria, picking at his food, pretending not to hear the muffled laughter from the tables nearby. A few curious glances darted in his direction, quickly followed by smirks and chuckles. Aiden's face burned, and he hunched over his tray, shrinking under the weight of their attention. Just before the end of the day, his homeroom teacher, Ms. Evans, asked the students to introduce themselves. Aiden took a deep breath, hoping this would be a chance to make a good impression. I'm Aiden Brown, he said, his voice steady, yet hopeful. Ms. Evans barely glanced in his direction, her eyes already moving to the next student. A few kids rolled their eyes, and a couple snickered as if his presence was something to be tolerated. Not welcomed, Aiden sank back into his seat, the small glimmer of hope extinguished. When his parents asked him later how his day had gone, he forced a smile, trying to keep his voice upbeat. It was fine, he said, pushing down the disappointment that sat like a stone in his stomach. The classes are challenging. His mom beamed with pride, and his dad nodded approvingly, satisfied with his response. They didn't need to know, not yet. This move was supposed to be a dream, not a nightmare. He didn't want to burden them with his fears, didn't want to spoil the hope that radiated from their faces. That night, alone in his room, the silence felt thick and heavy, pressing down on him like the weight of all the words he couldn't say. The whispers, the stares, the laughter, all of it replayed in his mind, turning over and over until he could barely close his eyes. The second morning at Maplewood Academy felt different. Aiden adjusted his backpack, hoping to shake off the memory of yesterday, of the way it felt like the walls had closed in around him with every stare and whisper. He forced himself to stand a little straighter as he walked toward the building, reminding himself of his dad's words. Show them what you're made of. He took a deep breath as he pushed through the bustling crowd of students, determined to find a place to sit for lunch that didn't feel like a spotlight. The cafeteria was noisy, filled with kids laughing and talking in tight groups, each table an unspoken fortress with its own rules. Aiden hesitated, scanning for an empty spot. He finally found one at a table near the back, away from the clusters of students whose eyes seemed to linger on him just a second too long. He kept his head down, trying to focus on his sandwich. But the whispers started again. Low, barely audible at first, but unmistakable. A girl across the room shot him a sidelong glance before leaning toward her friends, her lips moving quickly as they glanced back at him, their eyes flickering with curiosity and something sharper, a subtle, biting judgment. Ignore it, he thought, clenching his hands under the table, the half-eaten sandwich suddenly heavy in his hands. They're just curious. But as the laughter rose around him, echoing off the cafeteria walls, his shoulders tightened. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was a stranger in a world that didn't want him. The bell rang, and Aiden's relief was instant. He gathered his things and hurried to his next class, hoping the rest of the day would offer some relief. But as he entered math class, he saw them, Tyler and his group, sprawled out in the middle rows, laughing loudly. Tyler's eyes caught Aiden's as he stepped in, and for a moment, his smile grew, a slow, mocking grin that made Aiden's heart skip. Aiden quickly slipped into a seat in the back, focusing on his notebook as if the equations scribbled there were the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. But he could still feel their eyes on him, Tyler's laugh cutting through the classroom noise like a knife. New kid, huh? Tyler's voice was low but pointed, just loud enough for Aiden to hear, and the other kids stifled laughs, leaning in as if they didn't want to miss a word. Aiden forced himself to keep looking at his notebook, hoping his silence would make them lose interest. But Tyler only seemed emboldened by Aiden's reaction or lack thereof. By the end of the day, Aiden felt as though he'd walked through a gauntlet. His footsteps grew slower, his shoulders slumping as he made his way to the school courtyard, hoping for a quiet moment before heading home. But as he sank onto a bench, pulling out a book, he saw them again, Tyler and his friends, drifting toward him with smirks plastered on their faces. Hey, Aiden, Tyler called out, drawing out his name like it was a joke. Enjoying Maplewood? Aiden looked up, forcing a neutral expression. It's fine, he says. Tyler laughed, sharing a look with his friends. One of them, Josh, Aiden thought his name was, snickered, nudging Tyler as if to encourage him. This is a top school. You know, some of us had to work hard to get here. Aiden swallowed hard, keeping his voice steady. I know. Good, Tyler replied, his tone mocking. Then, without warning, he tilted the juice he was holding, spilling it right onto Aiden's shirt. The cold, sticky liquid spread instantly, soaking into the fabric. Tyler and his friends erupted into laughter, their voices ringing out across the courtyard, each laugh piercing Aiden's pride. Aiden froze, his cheeks burning as he looked down at his ruined shirt, the smell of juice filling his senses. He fought the urge to yell, to lash out, but the words stuck in his throat, thick and bitter. The humiliation was like a weight pressing on his chest, leaving him unable to breathe. Grabbing his backpack, he stood up abruptly, pushing past them without a word and heading straight to the restroom. Once inside, he locked himself in a stall, leaning against the door as he tried to calm his breathing. He wiped at the juice with his shirt sleeve, but the stain remained, a sticky reminder of Tyler's laughter, of the whispers, of every moment he'd tried to ignore. He stayed there for a while, breathing deeply, fighting back the burning in his eyes. He wouldn't cry, not here. Not because of them. Taking a shaky breath, he finally gathered himself enough to leave, avoiding the mirror as he slipped out of the restroom and down the hallway. The day stretched on endlessly, each class a trial, each whispered laugh and sidelong glance another reminder that he didn't belong. By the time the final bell rang, Aiden felt as if he'd run a marathon, his nerves frayed and raw. The exhaustion was bone deep. A weariness that seemed to settle into his very soul. When he got home, his mom was waiting, her eyes lighting up as she saw him. "How was school today, honey?" Aiden forced a smile, the practiced answer falling from his lips. "It was fine," he said, his voice hollow. She smiled, oblivious to the turmoil churning inside him. And Aiden hated that he couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. He didn't want to see the disappointment on her face. Didn't want to admit that this school, their dream for him, was turning into a nightmare. That night, he lay awake, the events of the day replaying in his mind like a broken record. Each whisper and laugh echoing in the silence of his room. He wondered if things would ever change. If he could ever feel like he belonged in this place that seemed determined to remind him that he didn't. As the hours ticked by, sleep refused to come, and Aiden stared up at the ceiling, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt before. The third day at Maplewood Academy started with an eerie sense of dread that Aiden couldn't shake. He dragged his feet, taking his time as he buttoned his shirt, then unbuttoned it, and buttoned it again, as if adjusting his appearance could somehow make him invisible. But he knew it wouldn't. He could already feel the weight of Tyler's laughter from the day before, still hanging over him like a shadow he couldn't outrun. As Aiden entered the school, he walked quickly, keeping his gaze fixed on the floor. The echo of conversations, laughter, and shuffling footsteps surrounded him. But none of it included him. Every step felt heavier, every passing face a reminder that he was the outsider here. His first class passed quietly, with Aiden doing his best to blend into the background, to become invisible. But as he walked into the hallway, he spotted Tyler and his friends lingering by his locker, their faces lighting up when they saw him. Aiden's stomach clenched, and he considered turning around. But they'd already seen him. Tyler smirked, his voice dripping with false cheer. "Hey, Aiden, how's it going?" Aiden forced himself to walk up to his locker, keeping his expression as neutral as possible. "It's fine," he muttered, fiddling with the lock. Without warning, Tyler slammed his hand against the locker door, just inches from Aiden's face. Aiden flinched, his heartbeat pounding in his ears as he stared at the metal door, not daring to look up. "Didn't you hear me, Aiden?" Tyler's tone was sharp, each word biting. "I asked you a question." Aiden swallowed, his voice barely a whisper. I said it's fine." "Good," Tyler sneered, backing off with a mocking grin. "Just making sure you're paying attention." As Tyler and his friends walked away, laughter trailing behind them, Aiden released the breath he'd been holding, his hands shaking as he opened his locker. He took a moment to steady himself, staring at the books lined up inside as if they could somehow ground him. The day only grew worse from there. In the cafeteria, Tyler's group made a show of blocking Aiden's path, their laughter echoing as they passed crude comments back and forth. Loud enough for Aiden to hear but just quiet enough to escape the teacher's notice. He kept his head down, his face burning as he tried to ignore them. But their words burrowed into him, each comment chipping away at his resolve. When he finally made it to English class, Aiden felt as though he were underwater. Every movement slow, every sound muffled. He found a seat near the back and slumped into it, exhausted from the constant vigilance he'd had to maintain all day. Ms. Evans, his English teacher, began the lesson, asking questions and calling on students with a practiced ease. When she asked a question about the assigned reading, Aiden raised his hand, his voice quiet but steady as he offered an answer. Ms. Evans barely glanced at him before moving on, her gaze sweeping over Aiden as if he were invisible. Moments later, another student echoed Aiden's exact words, and Ms. Evans beamed, praising him for his insight. Aiden felt a pang of frustration and humiliation. His hands clenched under the desk. The sting of being ignored cut deeper than Tyler's laughter, the dismissal settling in his chest like a heavy stone. The final bell was a relief. But the halls were still a minefield. Tyler and his friends seemed to be everywhere, their taunts a constant background noise. As Aiden walked toward the exit, he heard them snickering from behind. "Look at him, Mr. Too Good for Us," one of them whispered loudly, followed by a round of laughter. Aiden kept walking, his jaw tight, refusing to turn around. But as he reached the doors, he felt something smack against the back of his head, a crumpled piece of paper. thrown with pinpoint accuracy. The laughter followed him out of the building, each laugh echoing in his mind as he walked down the path leading away from Maplewood. The walk home felt endless, the weight of the day pressing down on him with every step. When he finally arrived, his parents were waiting, smiles on their faces, ready to hear about his day. He mustered up a small, hollow smile, giving the same answer he'd repeated the past 2 days. It was fine, he said, the lie tasting bitter in his mouth. That night, alone in his room, Aiden stared at the ceiling, his mind replaying every moment of the day. The taunts, the whispers, the teacher's indifference, it all swirled together. A relentless wave of humiliation and isolation. His hands trembled as he clenched his fists, fighting the tears that burned at the corners of his eyes. Just endure it, he thought. Maybe it'll stop. But deep down, Aiden knew the truth. Things weren't getting better. They were getting worse. As the days blurred into weeks, the whispers turned to laughter, and the taunts became an unrelenting chorus. Aiden's world at Maplewood Academy was shrinking. Each hallway and classroom another place to avoid. Another reminder that he didn't belong. Tyler and his friends seemed to be everywhere, their eyes always watching, waiting for any excuse to make his life harder. One morning, Aiden was barely through the front doors when he felt a sudden, hard shove from behind. He stumbled, catching himself against the lockers as Tyler and his friends laughed, walking past him without even a glance. Other students looked on, some with pity, some with discomfort, but none with the courage to step in. Aiden's face burned as he adjusted his backpack, forcing himself to keep moving, even as the anger and shame twisted inside him like a knot. Each day at school was a carefully orchestrated struggle. He mapped out his paths between classes, trying to avoid Tyler and his group, hoping he could just make it through one day without being humiliated. But his best efforts weren't enough. During lunch, he had taken to sitting in the courtyard, a small attempt to escape the constant stares in the cafeteria. The courtyard was quieter, with benches and a few trees, and for a moment, he thought he'd found a safe place. But it wasn't long before Tyler and his friends discovered his hiding spot. "Hey, Aiden," Tyler sneered as he approached, his voice laced with mock friendliness. "Skipping out on the cafeteria today? Too good to eat with the rest of us?" Aiden looked up, his jaw clenched as he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. "I just like it better out here," he muttered, hoping they'd lose interest and leave. But Tyler wasn't done. With a smirk, he held out his juice, tipping it just enough that it splashed all over Aiden's shirt, the sticky liquid soaking through his clothes. Tyler's friends laughed, their voices echoing across the courtyard as Aiden sat frozen, his face flushed with humiliation. "Oops," Tyler said, feigning innocence as he leaned in closer. "Guess you're gonna need to learn how to clean up after yourself." Aiden gritted his teeth, biting back the words that clawed at his throat. He couldn't let them see him break. Slowly, he stood, ignoring their laughter as he grabbed his backpack and walked to the restroom. Behind the closed stall door, he wiped at the juice with trembling hands, his breath shallow as he fought to keep himself together. He stared at the stain on his shirt, a bright, sticky reminder of his helplessness. Back in class, the humiliation lingered. Ms. Evans, his English teacher, was discussing the assignment, asking students for their thoughts. Aiden raised his hand, his mind spinning as he tried to ignore the sticky feeling on his shirt. Ms. Evans glanced in his direction, but her gaze skimmed past him as if he wasn't even there. A few moments later, another student repeated Aiden's answer, word for word, and Ms. Evans beamed, praising them for their insight. Aiden felt his heart sink, his hand dropping to his desk as the sting of being ignored cut deeper than any taunt. He was invisible to her, just another face in the classroom, not worth her attention. The frustration and hurt swirled together, a painful lump in his throat. By the end of the week, Aiden's spirit was crumbling. He was careful to avoid his parents' questions, giving them the same hollow answer, "It's fine." But each lie weighed heavier on him, pressing down until he felt like he could barely breathe. He didn't want them to know how much he was struggling. He couldn't bear the thought of them seeing him like this, of them realizing how far from fine he really was. One afternoon, as he walked toward the exit, Tyler and his friends were waiting, leaning casually against the lockers. Aiden's heart raced as he saw them, his pulse quickening as he tried to sidestep them. But Tyler stepped in his path, a mocking grin spreading across his face. Going somewhere, Aiden? He asked, his voice dripping with false friendliness. Aiden didn't answer, his hands clenched into fists as he tried to push past them. But Tyler shoved him back, and Aiden stumbled, his backpack slipping from his shoulder as he tried to steady himself. Tyler's friends laughed, their voices like knives slicing through the air. The humiliation burned in Aiden's chest, a helpless, angry flame that left him feeling small and powerless. The other students in the hallway pretended not to see, their eyes fixed on anything but him, their silence a tacit agreement to let the torment continue. That night, Aiden walked home with his head down, each step heavier than the last. His parents greeted him with hopeful smiles, their eyes bright with the dreams they'd worked so hard to give him. Aiden forced a smile, nodding at their questions, but inside, he felt like he was collapsing, his heart weighed down by the silence he could no longer carry. When he finally escaped to his room, he sat on his bed, staring at the walls as the reality settled over him, suffocating and unyielding. He couldn't do this alone. But telling his parents felt like admitting defeat, like letting Tyler and his friends win. So he bottled it up, forcing down the anger, the hurt, the shame. But deep down, he knew something had to give. The weight of the bullying was pressing down on him, and he couldn't keep pretending it didn't hurt. He couldn't keep lying to himself, or to his parents. As he lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the thought lingered, echoing in the quiet darkness. How much longer can I hold on? The bullying had become as constant as the ringing of the school bell. A relentless drumbeat that followed Aiden from the moment he walked through the doors until he left. Each day blurred into the next. Each insult, each shove, a bruise on his spirit that no one else could see. And still, Aiden kept silent, each lie to his parents weighing heavier than the last. Each smile more hollow. But one day, things reached a breaking point. It started like any other day. Aiden walked through the halls, his shoulders tense, his gaze fixed firmly on the floor. He tried to make himself small, to disappear into the background. But Tyler and his group had become experts at spotting him. They seemed to know exactly when and where to find him. And today was no different. As the final bell echoed through the building, signaling the end of the school day, Aiden hurried down the hallway, hoping to escape unnoticed. But Tyler and his friends were waiting by the bathrooms, lounging casually against the wall. The sight of them made his heart pound, and he considered taking the long way around, even if it meant missing his bus. But before he could turn, Tyler spotted him, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Hey, Aiden," he called out, his voice laced with malice. "Got a second? We just want to show you some Maplewood hospitality." Aiden's stomach twisted, a flash of fear sparking in his chest. But he kept his expression neutral. I need to get home," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "Oh, come on," Tyler replied, his voice mocking as he gestured for Aiden to follow him. "We'll make it quick." Before Aiden could react, Tyler's friends closed in, blocking his path, their faces smug and unyielding. They corralled him toward the bathroom, their voices low and menacing as they urged him inside. Aiden's heart hammered in his chest as they surrounded him, his pulse a deafening roar in his ears. Inside the bathroom, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the tiled walls. Tyler leaned against the sink, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed as he looked Aiden up and down. The silence stretched, heavy and tense, as Aiden stood there, feeling trapped and small under Tyler's gaze. Tyler's smirk widened, a cruel glint in his eyes. "So, Aiden, how are you liking Maplewood?" Aiden swallowed, his mouth dry. "It's fine," he managed, his voice barely a whisper. Tyler chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't think you get it, Aiden. See, around here, we have certain expectations. And you?" He gestured at Aiden with a look of disgust. "You don't fit." Before Aiden could respond, Tyler stepped forward, his face inches from Aiden's. He could smell the faint hint of cologne mixed with something sharper. Something predatory. Tyler's voice dropped to a whisper, a sinister edge cutting through his words. Maybe a little swim will help you remember where you belong. Aiden's eyes widened as the meaning behind Tyler's words sank in. He tried to step back, but Tyler's friends closed in, grabbing his arms, their grip bruising as they forced him toward the stalls. He struggled, panic surging in his chest. But they were stronger, their laughter echoing off the walls as they dragged him to the toilet. Come on, Aiden, Tyler sneered, tightening his grip on Aiden's collar. Don't fight it, it's just a little water. Aiden thrashed, his movements frantic, but it was no use. Tyler's grip was iron, and in one swift motion, he forced Aiden's head down, shoving his face into the cold, dirty water. The shock of it stole his breath, his lungs burning as he struggled, water splashing against his skin, the humiliation searing deeper than the cold. Tyler's laughter was muffled, distant, as Aiden's vision blurred, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anger. When they finally let go, he stumbled back, gasping for air, his clothes soaked, his hair dripping. He collapsed against the wall, every part of him trembling as he fought to steady his breathing. They left him there, their laughter fading as they walked out, leaving him soaked, humiliated, and broken. Aiden sat there for a long moment, staring at the floor, his hands clenched, his body shaking with a mixture of rage and shame. He wanted to scream, to yell, to hit something, but he was too exhausted, too defeated. Finally, he pushed himself to his feet, his legs unsteady as he made his way to the sink. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, his face pale, his eyes hollow. The boy staring back at him looked like a stranger, someone beaten down and broken. By the time he arrived home that night, Aiden felt as if he were floating, as if his body had become something separate, something numb and distant. His parents greeted him with warm smiles, asking about his day, their voices full of hope. He answered automatically, his responses clipped, each word like a stone lodged in his throat. When he finally escaped to his room, he collapsed onto his bed, his mind replaying every moment of the day. The laughter, the water, the feeling of Tyler's hands on his collar. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his hands to his temples, trying to block it out. But the memories wouldn't leave, each one sharper and more painful than the last. That night, Aiden barely slept. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing in around him like a weight he couldn't escape. He knew he couldn't keep going like this, that he couldn't face another day at Maplewood with Tyler and his friends waiting to tear him down. But even as he lay there, the thought of telling his parents felt like a betrayal, like admitting defeat. He didn't want them to know how broken he felt, how small and powerless he'd become. He didn't want to shatter the dreams they'd built for him, dreams of success and happiness that felt farther away than ever. The silence of the night grew heavier, and Aiden found himself whispering into the darkness, his voice barely more than a breath. How much longer can I hold on? The next morning, Aiden could barely summon the energy to get out of bed. His body ached, each movement reminding him of the day before, of Tyler's sneering face, of the icy water and the laughter that had echoed through the bathroom. But somehow, he pushed himself up, dressed, and made his way downstairs where his mom and dad were waiting, their faces bright with their usual smiles. Aiden, honey, do you want some breakfast before school? His mom asked, her tone light and hopeful. He nodded silently, forcing a smile as he sat down. But his appetite had vanished. He picked at his food, his mind distant, already drifting to the inevitable torment awaiting him at school. As they drove to Maplewood, Aiden kept his gaze fixed on the window, his fingers twisting together nervously. His dad's hand rested on the steering wheel, his face thoughtful, glancing at Aiden every so often. When they arrived, Aiden muttered a quick goodbye, not meeting his father's eyes as he climbed out of the car. But his dad's voice stopped him. Aiden, he said, his voice gentle yet firm. If anything's going on, you know you can tell us, right? Aiden froze, his heart pounding. For a brief, desperate moment, he considered telling him everything about Tyler, the bathroom, the teachers who looked the other way. But he forced himself to smile, shaking his head. Everything's fine, Dad, he lied. his voice barely above a whisper. Just a lot of homework. That's all. His dad watched him for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before finally nodding. All right, son. But remember, you don't have to face anything alone. Aiden swallowed hard, nodding before he turned and walked toward the school. He didn't dare look back, the weight of his father's gaze pressing on him like a stone. Unbeknownst to Aiden, his dad sat in the car, watching him walk through the doors, his heart heavy with a father's intuition that something was deeply wrong. Mr. Brown's mind replayed the shadows under Aiden's eyes, the distant way he'd been answering their questions, the hollow look in his eyes that seemed to grow darker each day. He couldn't ignore it any longer. Determined to get answers, Mr. Brown parked his car and followed Aiden into the school, keeping a careful distance, observing as he navigated the hallways. It didn't take long for him to spot Tyler and his group. Their faces smug, eyes narrowing as they noticed Aiden walking down the hall. Mr. Brown's stomach twisted as he watched Tyler's group close in on his son. Their voices low and taunting, their laughter cruel. Aiden's shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the floor, his steps growing slower, more hesitant. Mr. Brown clenched his fists, anger bubbling up as he watched the scene unfold. He continued following Aiden to class, standing just outside the door where he could see in through the window. The teacher, Ms. Evans, seemed oblivious to Aiden's presence, her gaze skimming over him as if he were invisible. Mr. Brown's jaw tightened as he watched her ignore Aiden's raised hand, then turn and smile as another student repeated Aiden's answer and received praise. The final blow came later that morning when he overheard Aiden's biology teacher make a cruel, offhand remark about kids who don't belong. Mr. Brown's heart ached as he watched Aiden shrink under the teacher's words, his expression crumpling before he quickly looked down, hiding his face from the class. Mr. Brown had seen enough. That evening, as Aiden sat at the dinner table, picking at his food in silence, his father cleared his throat, his voice gentle but firm. Aiden, he began, watching his son carefully, I want to talk to you about school. Aiden's stomach twisted, his fork freezing mid-air. It's fine, Dad, I told you, it's just a lot of work. But his dad wasn't buying it this time. He placed a reassuring hand on Aiden's shoulder, his voice soft yet unwavering. I was there today, Aiden. I saw Tyler, and I saw the way your teachers treated you. I know it's not fine. For a moment, Aiden sat frozen, his heart hammering in his chest as his father's words sank in. He opened his mouth to protest, to deny it, but the lie died on his lips, choked by the emotions he'd kept bottled up for weeks. And then, like a dam breaking, the words spilled out. Aiden told his dad everything, the whispers, the laughter, the teachers who turned a blind eye, the bathroom incident with Tyler and his friends. Every hurt, every humiliation he'd suffered came pouring out, his voice shaking, tears slipping down his cheeks as he finally let himself feel the weight of it all. His father listened in silence, his face a mask of anger and sorrow. When Aiden finished, his dad pulled him into a tight hug, his voice steady with a quiet, fierce determination. This stops now, Aiden, he said, his words a promise. You're not going back to that school to face this alone. I'm going to make sure this never happens again. The next morning, Mr. Brown didn't just drop Aiden off at school, he walked in beside him, his face set with determination. He marched straight into the administrative office, demanding a meeting with the principal. His voice was calm, but his words carried a weight that made even the secretary hesitate. In the principal's office, Mr. Brown laid out everything he'd witnessed, his tone unwavering as he described the bullying, the harassment, and the teacher's indifference. The principal shifted uncomfortably, offering vague assurances. But Mr. Brown wasn't finished. He demanded action, disciplinary measures for the bullies, accountability for the teachers who'd failed to intervene, and a commitment to creating a safe environment for every student, including his son. When his concerns were brushed aside, Mr. Brown's determination only grew. He made phone calls, escalating the issue until law enforcement was involved. By the afternoon, officers were on campus, questioning students, teachers, and administrators alike. The investigation sent a ripple of shock through the school. leaving everyone on edge. Aiden watched from a distance, his heart pounding as he saw Ms. Evans being escorted from the building. Her face pale, eyes avoiding his. His tormentors shifted nervously in the hallways, their smirks replaced by uneasy glances, their voices hushed. The once overwhelming presence of Tyler and his friends seemed to shrink as the weight of accountability pressed down on them. For the first time since arriving at Maplewood, Aiden felt a strange mixture of relief and fear. Relief that someone was finally standing up for him, and fear of what came next. But as he looked at his father, standing strong beside him, he felt something else, an unfamiliar sense of hope. "You're not alone in this, Aiden," his father reminded him, his voice a steady anchor. "Not anymore." And as Aiden took a deep breath, he realized he finally believed it. The shockwave of Mr. Brown's confrontation with Maplewood Academy's administration and the arrival of law enforcement had left the school reeling. Whispers filled the hallways, the usual chatter replaced by uneasy glances and hushed conversations. Teachers and students alike sensed the shift in the air, a ripple of accountability spreading through the walls. Aiden walked through the halls, feeling a strange and unfamiliar weight lifted from his shoulders. Tyler and his group kept their distance, their once mocking faces now shadowed with uncertainty. They walked past Aiden with their heads down, avoiding his gaze. For the first time, he didn't feel like prey in the jungle of Maplewood's halls. Instead, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: dignity. The following morning, the entire school was called into an assembly. The principal took the stage, her expression solemn as she addressed the students. She spoke about the need for respect, the importance of a safe environment, and the changes that were going to take place to ensure that no student ever felt unwelcome or overlooked. Aiden sat in the middle row, surrounded by a sea of faces that no longer sneered or laughed. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, not with judgment or mockery, but with a quiet curiosity, and maybe even a touch of respect. His heart pounded as he listened to the principal outline new policies aimed at eradicating bullying and promoting inclusivity. Anti-bullying programs, sensitivity training, and strict rules on student conduct were being implemented immediately. Some of the bullies, including Tyler, were required to attend a mandatory session on respect and accountability. Aiden noticed the tension on Tyler's face as he listened. His bravado cracked, his gaze flickering between his friends with something that looked like shame. Watching Tyler in that moment, Aiden felt an odd sense of closure, not victory, but a quiet satisfaction that things were finally changing. In the days that followed, the changes were palpable. Teachers who had once ignored Aiden now acknowledged him, calling on him in class, offering him encouragement, and treating him with the respect he'd always deserved. His biology teacher, who had previously dismissed him, looked at him differently now, her tone gentler, her approach softer. Ms. Evans was gone, replaced by a new teacher who emphasized kindness and inclusivity, making an effort to connect with each student. One day, as Aiden was gathering his books after class, a boy named Jordan, who had always sat a few seats away, approached him. Jordan's gaze was awkward, his hands fidgeting as he spoke. "Hey, Aiden," he started, his voice low. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I mean, I should have spoken up. I saw what Tyler and them were doing. But I didn't do anything. I didn't want to get involved." Aiden looked at him, feeling a mix of emotions he couldn't quite place. He remembered all the times he'd seen Jordan glance away, all the moments he'd been on the receiving end of his silence. But now, here Jordan was, offering an apology, no matter how late. Aiden nodded slowly, offering a small, forgiving smile. "It's okay, Jordan," he said, his voice steady. "Just be better next time." Jordan nodded, relief flooding his face as he offered a tentative smile before hurrying away. Aiden watched him go, feeling an unexpected lightness. It wasn't just the apology that mattered, it was the realization that people could change, even if it took time. His heart felt a little less heavy. The weeks rolled on, and the changes at Maplewood Academy continued to take root. The school walls, once plain and unfeeling, now sported new murals, vibrant colors celebrating diversity and unity. Aiden even found himself contributing ideas for the artwork during a group discussion. his classmates listening, nodding, treating him as an equal. For the first time, Aiden felt something he hadn't thought possible at Maplewood, a sense of belonging. Teachers checked in with him regularly. His classmates greeted him in the hallways. And slowly, he began to reclaim his confidence. It was as if a fog had lifted, and he could finally see the world around him with a sense of hope. One afternoon, his dad picked him up from school. Mr. Brown's face softened as he watched Aiden climb into the car. His expression lighter, more relaxed. "How was school today?" he asked. His voice warm. Aiden smiled. A genuine, unforced smile. "It was good, Dad. Really good." They drove in comfortable silence, the weight of the past few months finally falling away. That evening, as Aiden sat at the dinner table with his parents, sharing stories from his day, laughter filled the room, light and free. His mom and dad exchanged glances, a shared look of relief and joy, knowing their son was finally beginning to heal. The talent show was approaching, a school tradition Aiden had previously dreaded. But this time, he felt a surge of excitement as he signed up. His name added to the list under the category of piano performance. The piano had always been his refuge, a place where he could escape the chaos of the world around him. Now, it was a place where he could share a part of himself, to show Maplewood who he truly was. On the night of the talent show, the auditorium buzzed with energy. Aiden's hands shook slightly as he took his place at the piano, the spotlight casting a warm glow across the stage. As he began to play, the notes flowed effortlessly, filling the auditorium with a melody that carried all the emotions he'd held inside: hope, resilience, strength. When he finished, the applause was thunderous, filling the room with an energy he'd never felt before. Aiden stood, taking a deep breath, his heart racing with pride as he looked out over the sea of faces. Some familiar, some new, but all of them were watching him with respect. For the first time, Aiden felt seen, not as a victim, not as an outsider, but as someone who had something to offer. As he left the stage, his father was waiting in the wings, his face beaming with pride. He pulled Aiden into a tight hug, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it, son," he whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Aiden hugged him back, feeling the truth of his father's words settle in his heart. He had made it through, not just because of his father's support, but because he'd found the strength within himself to stand tall, to keep going, even when things were at their darkest. As they left the school that night, Aiden looked back at the building, the lights of the auditorium still glowing softly. Maplewood Academy had once been a place of pain, of silence, of loneliness. But now, it was something else, a place where he had reclaimed his voice, where he had found his strength. Aiden knew his journey was far from over, but he also knew one thing for certain: he wasn't walking it alone. The final weeks of the school year brought a profound transformation to Maplewood Academy. Not just in its policies or its programs, but in the way it felt. The once cloistered, silent halls now thrummed with a new energy, one rooted in respect and inclusivity. Aiden walked those hallways differently now, his head held high, his footsteps confident, a quiet strength radiating from him. Everywhere he looked, there were signs of change. Muralists had been invited to paint the walls with scenes celebrating diversity, resilience, and unity, and Aiden had volunteered to help, his own designs adding color to the once plain walls. Anti-bullying programs had been established, and teachers who'd once turned a blind eye were now actively engaged, greeting students, offering support, and ensuring everyone felt seen. One day after class, Ms. Collins, the new English teacher who had replaced Ms. Evans, pulled Aiden aside. "I just wanted to tell you, Aiden," she said warmly, "you're an inspiration to this school. What you've done, how you've handled everything, it's changed things here for the better." Aiden felt a surge of gratitude, a warmth that spread through him like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Thank you," he replied, his voice steady. I didn't want anyone to feel the way I felt." And he didn't. Through his strength, Aiden had helped Maplewood become a place where every student could feel safe, respected, and supported. One afternoon, as he sat on a bench in the courtyard, watching students chatting and laughing, Tyler approached him. Aiden tensed instinctively. But there was no sneer, no smugness in Tyler's expression. Instead, Tyler's face was unreadable, his hands stuffed awkwardly into his pockets. "Hey, Aiden," Tyler began, his voice quieter than usual. He glanced around before looking Aiden in the eye. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." Aiden studied him for a long moment, remembering the months of torment. The bruises, the humiliation, the pain of those days still lingered. But he could see something new in Tyler's eyes: regret. Even shame. The old Aiden might have turned away, might have rejected the apology. But the new Aiden was stronger than that. "Just be better," Aiden said simply, his voice calm. "For yourself and for everyone else." Tyler nodded, his shoulders slumping with relief. "I will," he replied, his tone sincere, before turning and walking away. Watching Tyler disappear into the crowd, Aiden felt a strange peace settle over him. He knew that not everyone could change. But maybe some people could. And maybe, just maybe, the compassion he offered could open a door to something better for everyone. As the last day of school approached, Aiden's dad encouraged him to start something new. A legacy that would continue even after he left Maplewood. And so, the idea for a mentorship program was born. Aiden, along with Ms. Collins and a few other supportive teachers, created a system where older students could mentor younger ones, ensuring they never felt alone or unheard. Aiden's own journey became the foundation for the program. He shared his story with the new mentors, teaching them to look out for others, to be the support he'd once needed. As he spoke, the group listened with a quiet intensity, inspired by his courage and determination. On the last day of school, Aiden was called to the stage during a special assembly. The principal took the microphone, her face glowing with pride as she introduced him to the entire school. "Today, we recognize Aiden Brown, a student who has shown us the true meaning of resilience, courage, and integrity," she said, her voice echoing through the auditorium. "Through his actions, Aiden has not only changed Maplewood Academy but has left a legacy that will inspire us for years to come." Aiden stood, heart pounding, as the entire school erupted in applause. His parents sat in the front row, their eyes shining with pride, his mom dabbing at her tears. Aiden felt a rush of gratitude, not only for his family but for everyone who had stood by him and helped him reclaim his voice. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward to the microphone, his voice steady and clear as he looked out over the sea of faces, each one watching him with respect. "When I first came to Maplewood, I felt invisible. I thought the only way to survive was to stay silent, to let things happen, but I learned that silence only lets injustice grow. I learned that we all have a voice, and when we use it together, we can make something powerful." He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience, feeling the weight of his words settle over them. "So, for anyone who feels alone or unseen, know that you're not. Know that your voice matters. And when you're ready to speak, we're here to listen." A thunderous applause filled the room. And as Aiden stepped back from the microphone, he felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that his journey had not been for nothing. The pain, the struggle, it had all led him here, to this moment of triumph, where he could finally look back and see how far he'd come. Over the summer, Aiden continued volunteering for the mentorship program, his story inspiring younger students to stand up for themselves and for each other. The Maplewood halls that had once been haunted by whispers and mockery were now filled with laughter, with students supporting each other in ways Aiden could have only dreamed of months before. And as Aiden prepared to move on to the next chapter of his life, he knew he was leaving Maplewood a better place than he had found it, a place where resilience, kindness, and courage could grow. For Aiden, the journey wasn't over, but he was stronger, braver, and he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same strength that had brought him through the darkest days. His story had transformed a school, changed lives, and proved to everyone, including himself, that even the smallest voice, when spoken with courage, could inspire a movement. As he walked away from Maplewood Academy on his last day, the sunlight warmed his face, and a new, unbreakable hope blossomed in his heart.